Good morning. Welcome to our program. We have a show for you today which I believe can be a true inspiration, particularly if you come off the weekend maybe feeling a little bit sorry for yourself. You're going to meet some wonderful people, courageous people. The theme of today's program is handicapped parents of normal children. And we're going to meet a doctor who has been a quadriplegic since 1954, who has 6 children and 7 grandchildren with an 8th on the way. We have a woman with us today. We'll meet her and her daughter. She has that disease which has come to be known in the last couple of years as elephant man's disease. Talk about what she has had to face. We have a couple, both of whom have cerebral palsy, who they had to fight to get married, to fight to keep their children, and we're going to find out what story, what courage and energy went into that fight. Also on today's program, a blind mother of 2 sighted children. Now, admittedly, these are unusual cases, but the spirit of life comes shining through. All right, welcome to our show. Let us meet a most extraordinary couple. This is Dr. Joseph Panzarella and his wife, Josephine. Welcome to Midday. I'm proud to have you with us on today's program. Dr. Panzarella is 62 years old. He has multiple sclerosis and has been a quadriplegic, paralyzed, I guess, from the neck down since 1954. He is a medical doctor who practices 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. He is director and a rehabilitation specialist. And where is that? What hospital are you associated with?
The Brunswick Rehabilitation
I know
Hospital.
the people are watching there now, so let's say hello to the people at the Brunswick Rehabilitation Center.
Yes, it's a fine rehabilitation center. It's a part of a medical complex. And we have both inpatients and outpatients.
Let's turn the clock back a little bit to when you were struck with multiple sclerosis. What is the nature of the disease and your physical condition as you sit here today?
Bill, it's a very insidious disease. It strikes in many forms. No 2 victims of MS have the same symptoms, nor do they have the same prognosis. Some people can have 1 attack and never have another attack, or some people can have a very progressive, vicious disease, which puts them into a wheelchair or into a bed within a very short time.
In your particular case, it started out bad and just got worse and worse. Is that not correct?
Yes, I was in medical school, and at the time, it was during the war, Second World War, and we were in the Army. And I started to have difficulty in walking. And within a relatively short period of time, I had difficulty walking. I had to resort to a cane. I had many people see me. I went into a residency. I was discharged from the Army prior to that. And I worked for a while, but unfortunately, in 1953, I was involved in an automobile accident. And from that point on, I just couldn't walk anymore.
You were not paralyzed in the automobile accident, but somehow, at least according to what I read about you, the accident made the multiple sclerosis worse.
Right. It aggravated, exacerbated my condition.
If you wouldn't mind, I would like very much to talk a little bit about your relationship, because as you've heard, the theme of today's program is handicapped individuals who have and raise children, so-called normal children. How long did you know Joe prior to your getting married? And how long did you know, well, you're both named Joe. I was suggesting this to your wife.
I'm Little Joe.
Little Joe, all right. We're not on Bonanza here anyway. How long did you know each other prior to?
Well, we date back, like, I guess we were 14 when we got to meet one another.
So you're lifelong friends.
It's been, yes, close to 50 years now that we've known one another, I might say.
And what state was were you married when this first struck Joe?
No, we were engaged. And of course, he had given me the option of backing away from the marriage, and we decided we'd go through with it. We'd been going together for a number of years, and it didn't matter to us that he had that. We knew what the prognosis was.
Now, I think that I'd like you to talk just a little bit about what an important partner your wife is in your life in terms of the care that you get from her.
Bill, I can state that if she weren't with me, I don't think I could have accomplished all that I have accomplished. She has been a source of inspiration for me, a source of motivation for me. She has never allowed me to lose my dignity. She's never allowed me to lose my position as the head of the household. She always allows me to make the decisions. Maybe sometimes she doesn't follow them, but she has always been behind me, never tried to usurp or psychologically frustrate me in any way.
I wonder if you would, Mrs. Panzarella, if you could speak just a moment, a little bit about the routine that is involved in caring for your husband.
Well, I take over when he comes in from work and feed him. He'll sit around, read papers. We turn pages and do whatever is necessary. If any of the grandchildren are there, they'll help turn pages, and I'll take pride in helping feed Grandpa.
So everyone is taking care. Everyone is supporting. We have some of the pictures from your own family albums here. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about some of the folks gathered here? That's a beautiful photo. What was the occasion?
This was a testimonial given for Dr. Panzarella for the benefit of MS, National Multiple Sclerosis. All the proceeds were given to them. And these are all of our children with their spouses. Did you want me to go through them?
No, that's all right. It's just it's a happy,
he does
healthy...
have a sister there. Yeah, well, that's one of the things that's been beautiful. We've all shared in all of this. And
well, people might wonder, and we should get into this, you know, as the program progresses, the decision to have a family on top of just the difficulty of living the life of a paralyzed person and the wife of a paralyzed person required, I would imagine, a tremendous amount of consideration. Or did you give it almost no thought at all and just try to function as normally as possible?
We always function very normally, and as I say, even the children being brought up in that atmosphere have accepted it, have looked up to him with high regard. There's a lot of caring and sharing in the family, a lot of love. We're a very closely knit family.
What, is there any way that you could characterize... Oh, here's another photograph.
Well,
tell us about this.
Well, this is one of the Christmas photos that we had of all of the children, and of course, in a little pyramid on my husband there. They love being given a lift on the wheelchair. If he comes through on the chair, they'll usually hop on and get a ride. They'll ride in. There are 7 of them there, with my son in the background holding on to the youngest one there.
It's a wonderful, happy photograph. What would you say, if you had to characterize what your children and subsequently your grandchildren have in terms of their knowledge of life as a result of being raised in a family with a disabled person, that someone who comes from a family where this is not at all a factor does not have?
Well, I think they have the advantage of being able to see that a person, even though handicapped, can still operate and really do so much for other people. And they've grown up in that atmosphere. They accept it. They don't feel there's anything wrong with it. He's perfectly normal in their eyes.
Let's take a pause and we will continue with Dr. and Mrs. Panzarella just in 2 minutes. We'll be right back. Well, that was yet another photograph of Panzarella family. We have with us Dr. Joseph Panzarella and his wife, Josephine Panzarella, Little Joe, as she likes to be called. You have been paralyzed for how long? Since about 54?
About 54.
Since 1954, so for...
Right, it was progressive, slowly in the beginning, up until the automobile accident.
Mm-hmm.
Then very rapidly, and almost within a year of the automobile accident, I was in the wheelchair.
Mrs. Panzarella, how would you explain what you were able to do in those early years to help your husband adjust to the psychological frame of not being ever able to get out of a wheelchair and being more dependent than anyone would ever want to imagine ever having to be?
Well, I think at the very onset, naturally, he was a little depressed at being put into a wheelchair. But I always felt that it didn't matter. It was perfectly normal. There was no stigma attached to it, and treated it that way. I mean, there were times that he hated going into a store at the very beginning, and I just wouldn't take no for an answer and would bring him in. And he gradually, he's accepted it so beautifully and has made such a mark in this field.
One of the things that I have noted, particularly in reading the article in his Family Circle, right? The article about you and meeting you here today, is that word dignity. What are some of the things that happen to a person in a wheelchair or a paralyzed person that make it difficult to retain your dignity? Well, maybe you're there with your son or your daughter in a situation, or with your wife, the way that people respond to you.
Bill, a simple little thing. When you're in a group of people, initially they'll either shake your hand or they'll talk to you for a few moments, and then they drift away from you. They've lost sight of you. Although you're still there, you're no longer a part of the group. Now, this is something that my wife has been very, very good about. She's never allowed me, while I'm there, to become a secondary member of the group. She has always made me a primary person, and this has established my dignity. She has never in any way had the children lack for the need of companionship. Even though I haven't been able to do it, she has substituted and done it for me. And it's those little things that, quote unquote, normal people just do routinely and forget that many handicapped people can't do.
When you were raising your children, what were your guidelines about explaining to them what was wrong with Daddy, and how did you deal with the fears that that same thing might happen to them? That they were afraid, well, if Daddy is in a wheelchair, maybe someday I'll be in a wheelchair.
They really never expressed any doubts about that. They seem to have accepted this very well. They were quite young when he did go into the chair, and I think they always were so proud of him and loved him so much that they took on a lot of responsibility. They loved taking care of him, and they've always looked up to him as a father figure, and this is something we have never lost with them.
To whom did you look for inspiration in the early days?
Well, I think our faith carried us over a lot, our love of one another, the respect we had. I always felt he's a very modest person, and he had so much to offer, really and truly. We never did give up. When he first went into the wheelchair, there was a question of whether he would continue in medicine, and there were a lot of roadblocks put in our way, but we just kept going, and I would drive him in for different interviews, and Dr. Russ was very instrumental, you know, in finally placing him in rehabilitation.
It is, Dr. Panzarella, it has been almost 30 years that you have been in this state. Can you ever forget it?
No, Bill. Many times I do have recollections and desires to be able to do things that I used to. One of my greatest desires is a simple little thing, to grab my grandchildren and hold them, hug my wife. These are things that are so simple that I can't do. But even though I momentarily will have that desire, I've had so many other things that I'll sublimate those feelings and just take it as it is. But it hurts.
I can tell that it does hurt, and I can also tell that your statement of your husband's modesty is quite accurate.
Yes, it is.
I wonder whether or not it's possible to have an insight into, since you're not able to do so many things, what you have given your children in other ways than learning to throw a football with them, or dancing with them, or hugging them, as you just said. What, in addition to sublimating, what other things do you give them?
Well, I've tried to teach them that they must respect people and do to other people and treat other people the way they want to be treated. That a misfortune that occurs to someone could very well happen to them, and then not to look down on anyone less fortunate than they. I feel, and I try to inculcate honesty and faith in God, because we do believe in God. I've tried to make them understand that leading a good life is the best life, and that although they see that I can't do certain things, they can do them and do them well, and try to do them well. And all that I can ask of them is that their best effort should always be done.
Were there any problems in the teen years with their friends, in their friends' relationship to your family, the fact that you were paralyzed and in a wheelchair that you might recall?
I think so, Bill. And when they first were introduced to me, they always looked and kind of shied away a bit, because they weren't used to seeing a father in a wheelchair who still demanded of his children the respect, and they had to do their chores.
He made a great supervisor. He would sit right there and watch everything go on, you know. He would give them a task every Saturday that he was home. They'd go out and clean up something or do something, and he'd be right out there in the middle, and the children got to a point where they said, "Daddy, you don't have to come out, we'll get it done."
We'll do it anyway.
But he was very, very fastidious about things, and if their friends came along, they all got caught up in the act. They got to know when not to come.
So he was a good supervisor,
Oh,
obviously.
yes.
Still is a good
very
supervisor.
Much so, yes.
Still, I guess your work that you do is enormously important to you, in terms of not just keeping yourself occupied, but in using yourself in the most effective ways, because you work with people who are also disabled.
Right, Bill. Bill, medicine to me, other than my love for my wife, is the most important love I have. I don't believe I could be a happy person not practicing medicine. I think that my disability has been a tremendous value to me in treating my patients, because they know that I've been through it. And when I tell them something, and if they renege or they complain, I can always tell them, "Look, buddy, I've been there."
Yeah, there is no substitute for that
Right.
empathetical aspect
That's
of
right.
what you're doing.
Exactly.
Well, I think that at the beginning of the show, words really are not adequate to express how just being here on television can be of influence to people. Think of the difficulties that people have in their relationships that make them end relationships that pale in light of the difficulties that you two have faced in your relationship, and triumphed over those difficulties in the raising of children and being good grandparents and having a successful career. Your life is a testimony to the triumph of the Spirit and love.
Well, that very much so, yes. And we always say, we have a phrase, we always said that God closed one door and opened another, and I don't think he would have accomplished as much had he not been in the wheelchair, really and truly. And we're thankful he's here with us. That's the main thing, that take each day as it comes.
But I think having that attitude, I mean, a cynical person could say, well, of course you'd rather not be in the wheelchair. That is correct. But you have to accept the situation and make the most of it, or otherwise you would literally be going through life torturing yourself.
That's right.
More than you have already been deprived.
Right, Bill. You know, had I not accepted the fact that I'm disabled, nothing in this God's earth is going to change that fact. So either I accept it or become miserable. And the better of the two is to accept it and to go forward. And
to know that you can accomplish so much regardless of the fact that you're handicapped in a wheelchair, and you can still lead a very perfectly normal and fulfilling life.
But it must have been quite a challenge to literally get the job, to get the position that you have.
terrible, Bill. And believe me, my own colleagues at that time left a lot to be desired until I met Dr. Rusk.
Dr. Howard Rusk?
Howard
Yes.
Rusk.
Dr. Howard Rusk.
Believe me, he changed my world.
Well, and then as a result of that, you change other people's worlds.
Right.
Let's take a pause and we'll come back and continue. Today's theme is disabled parents who raise normal families. All right, joining us right now is Penny Avilas. Penny Avilas suffers from a disorder called neurofibromatosis. Recently, this became better known as the Elephant Man's disease because of the Broadway play and the film. She is here today with her daughter, Mindy. Mindy is 14 years old, and both of you live in Manhattan. Welcome to our program. Tell us a little bit about the nature of your disorder, when it was diagnosed, and what the prognosis was, and how you feel and are today. Yes.
My disorder?
Yes.
Well, I found out about it when I came here, when I was about 5 years old. I came from Puerto Rico, and then they didn't know what I had then over there. They just had removed the eye when I was 3 months old. Mm-hmm. And when I came here, then they found out that I had what was called then Van Recklinghouse's disease. Mm-hmm. And ever since then, I've been having surgery to correct the tumors that grow.
The characteristics of the disease, what are tumors?
It's a genetic disorder.
A genetic disorder?
Yes.
Did anyone else in your family have this?
No. In my case, I was a spontaneous mutation. So I was the only one that had it in my family. Mm-hmm. But it is hereditary.
How do you relate to that, Mindy? I'm sure this is something you spent a fair amount of time thinking about.
Not really. On
No?
a one-to-one basis with my mother, there's no real interference. It's not something that you think, well, the NF stands in the way. It's not like that. The only
No, I
time...
mean the hereditary nature of it, the fact that it's not impossible that it could happen. It's unlikely. I don't know. I don't know that much about it. That's really what I was asking.
Well, when my mother decided to have a child, she didn't know it was hereditary. So we didn't know until I was a bit older. And to check it out, we went to see Dr. Rubenstein, and he had me checked out. And as yet, I don't have any cafe au lait spots or any ideals that I'll be getting it. So if I do, well, it's something I'll have to accept, and I can relate to my mother. She can help me deal with it. It won't be as bad as she had it with no one to help her.
Well, you know the theme of today's program is parents with some form of disability who have children who are normal. Let's talk about the subject. What have been some of the difficulties for you that you've had to overcome as a mother with the disability that you have?
As a mother?
Yes.
Well, not many, really, as a mother. In my situation, the hardest thing to deal with the NF is dealing with the people themselves, the way they react towards you when they see you in the street, the way that they relate to you, the way that they make fun of you and call you all different kinds of names.
This actually happens to you?
Yes, always, continuously. And at the beginning, when I first started going out with my daughter, and, you know, people would come up and say really nasty, horrible things like, oh, my God, look at that lady, and...
Just volunteering these statements. This is not something you would overhear them saying across the street.
No, right there. She's been there with me when it's happened. You know, like on the subway, I would get these remarks, my God, that lady looked like she comes from Mars, or the other day I was in an office waiting to be called for an appointment, and some lady wouldn't sit next to me. She told her husband, I don't want to sit next to that lady because what she has might be contagious. You know, so these are the things that I have to deal with, and the fact that my daughter, thank God, has been so strong at the beginning was what hurted me the most, being, you know, seeing how she felt about it, how she feels inside when people do these things to me. Is she hurting? Is she hurting for me? Is she hurting for the things that the people say? That has been the hardest thing to deal with.
I tell you, it hurts just hearing these things. Didn't you react to that in that way?
I'm amazed
But
that
Bill,
people can be
she's
so
quite
cruel.
right.
They're cruel.
People unknowingly are very cruel. This woman, by no fault of her own, has a disability. People look at her and she loses that little dignity that she has by people looking at her and talking about her. If people would only know.
Well, maybe a little bit of that can be accomplished.
But for the grace of God.
It can be accomplished
Yeah,
on what we're doing here. Mindy, let's hear your mother is without question an honest, strong woman. This comes across right away. We see that. Can you give us your reaction to how you have learned to deal with the frustration and the anger that you must feel when you're in situations and total strangers say mean things about your mother?
Well, I know that she only hurts for me because she has a very strong outer blocking, and it doesn't affect her as it did, I'm sure, when she was younger. For me, it's totally ignoring people. I used to think of it as total ignorance, but now that more information, more programs are working to inform people, I don't rely on that anymore. I just totally think it's very wrong of people to do that and just ignore it totally.
We have just had a photograph here put up. Will you tell us what looks like a very happy occasion? Where was this taken?
That was in our living room. We were getting ready for a wedding.
Oh, that's nice. Let's look at some more. I think we have a few more photos here, which we will get to. Next up. Do we have it? Okay. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm. What birthday was that?
Your third birthday.
My third birthday.
How did you begin explaining to your daughter about this disability is that you have?
Well, in Mindy's case, she's always been a very strong person.
Yeah.
And we've always been together through all thick and thin, back and forth, in and out of the hospitals. You know, ever since she was born, I've been in and out of the hospitals for different kinds of surgery on my face. And so it gradually was something that we accepted between the two of us. But when she was about 5 years old, then I really sat down and explained to her, this is what I have, and this is what can happen. And it takes very different types of situations. You know, it works in so many different ways that at this point I cannot tell you how it's going to affect me in the future, but I just wanted you to be prepared, you know, in a sort of a nice kind of roundabout way, excuse me. I told her, I explained it to her when she was 5.
One of the things that I did want to just ask is that you lead off with such a strong statement about the things people say. You seem almost detached from it. Have you been able to develop a hard enough ego that it doesn't bother you now, or does it still hurt sometimes?
Well, if I told you that it didn't hurt, I would be lying.
Well, I don't want you to lie.
No,
I want
but what I
people
can
watching
tell
to
you is
understand.
that
Yeah.
I've learned to block it in somewhat ways. The hurt is there because you have the disorder. You know that you have what they accuse you of having. Oh my God, the bumps, and remind you that you have this. Sometimes when you're feeling the most happiest, someone will come along and just remind you that, you know, that it's there. And I hurt, but I'm not going to let it take me over. That's what I mean.
I understand it. I think it's very courageous. Let's take a pause. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about the mother-daughter relationship. I also want to hear your reaction to the Broadway play and the film The Elephant Man, how that entered your life and how it affected you. We'll be right back, right after this. Well, one of our guests, in case you just tuned in, is named Penny Vilas, and she suffers from that disease, neurofibromatosis, and she is raising her daughter. Do you have any other children, or just Mindy?
No, just Mindy.
Just Mindy, who is now a freshman in high school. And the theme of today's program is disabled people raising normal children. What were some of your early communications to your daughter about your condition and about how people reacted to your condition? You could spend the rest of the afternoon talking about the horrible things that happened to you.
Maybe you should
in
really
public. What do you remember first hearing from Mother about what was wrong with her?
Well, she tried in a very subtle way to tell me, but she did tell me everything. This way I know I don't have any, she doesn't have any secrets from me. She wants me to know the whole story so that if it should happen, because as she said, a lot of things could result from it, I'm not totally shocked. And gradually, by doing this, I can learn to accept it little by little. You can't really prepare for anything as going blind or getting cancer, but you try. Knowing it helps a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. But you don't remember any early...
Early, no.
What about the difficulty? Again, I have to repeat certain questions because they're applicable. When I asked the doctor and his wife about the difficulty with friends relating to parents, and you said when they first came around the house and you were in the wheelchair, what problems have you had in this whole socialization process because of your mother's disability?
Well, to my friends in school, my close friends, they never bother to ask me what it was. If I wanted to volunteer so that they can understand and not wonder about it, I would tell them. But they don't really come up to me and ask me. They deal with it very well. In my new school, where the first meeting they had, the coming together of all the children, my friends, they never came up to me and asked me what it was. They never, you know, backed off or anything. They accepted it, I suppose, without having any kind of explanation at all, and they still have not to this day asked me. So I won't volunteer. I mean, in school, where I'm involved in the science club and we're doing a whole project on it, hopefully we're trying to make people more aware of it in the school themselves. They can tell other friends. The youth is really an important group to get to at this stage. So,
What were your reactions to the I don't know if you saw the Broadway play, The Elephant Man.
I saw the movie.
Or the movie. All right, the movie, the movie, The Elephant Man. There was also the play. It was broadcast on TV. What were your reactions to that? Did it help, or did it hurt more?
I thought the movie was done well. I went to see it with a friend of mine from school, and at the end of the movie she cried, and she asked me, "What's wrong? Don't you have any emotions? Aren't you going to cry? Don't you feel bad for this man?" I didn't explain to her the whole happening of my mother having it or anything. I didn't want to get into it. But I felt very touched by it, and I could relate to this man. I thought it was very well done.
Doctor, you were making a couple comments on the commercial break when we heard yet more stories from Penny about some of the horrible things that happen that people say to you, and you said it's not unusual. I wonder if you expand on that a little bit, because part of what you're doing in your practice is dealing with people who do have disabilities or handicaps, or both, and well, why don't you just...
People just don't understand, and they're frightened by the unknown.
Don't you think there's a transference, too, that they're afraid that it could happen to them?
Happen to them.
Go ahead, I don't mean to interrupt,
Exactly.
but that's also prevalent.
Oh, you're quite right, Bill. It's that ignorance, that feeling that, gee, if this woman has it, well, maybe it's catching, and maybe I'll get it.
Yeah.
They don't
Well,
realize.
that must be a normal reaction, though. So how do we
quite
help
normal.
people to get beyond that? You see what I'm saying?
Doing exactly what you're doing today, Bill. Educating the public. They need education and understanding. I'm certainly, Mrs. Aviles doesn't want sympathy. She wants empathy. She wants an understanding of a problem.
And acceptance.
Acceptance, exactly. She is as normal as any other person. She has the right to have her life. And really and truly her, and I hate to go back to that dignity word again, but this is such an important thing.
Yes.
She deserves the dignity of a normal life.
Well, Penny, I think you should talk a little bit about what you have latched onto by way of courage that has given you the power to do what you've done, to go out, to work, to be out in public and to face on a day-to-day basis the fact that you're going to hear these awful things, as you did today, coming over here from students from Julia Richmond School.
Well, first of all, I would tell you I have a lot of faith, and I have a very strong constitution. I've had to, because I've had this all my life. I mean, even as a child, when I was growing up, I mean, they even had a little song about me, you know, when I was about 3 years old. The neighbors referring to the way the eye looked then before it was removed. I mean, you know, and so this is something like it's been all my life. It's like getting immune to it, but at the same time still part of you inside hurting. And I don't feel that at this point in my life ever I am just going to sit home and dwell and mope about it. I am a human being, and I'm just as good as anybody else, and I'm going to go out there and do the things that I feel that I should. And if people can't accept me that way, well, then just don't deal with me. I feel this way very strongly, that if a person cannot deal with themselves first, they cannot deal with me. You have to be able to accept yourself as a person before you can deal with other people.
It's true.
And if you can't do that, then you're really not to be bothered with at all.
That's really beautifully put. Can you just take a minute and tell us a little bit about some of the things you've done professionally, working and so forth? You have had a career.
Oh, I've worked, yes. I've worked in hospitals. I've worked in all different kinds of clinics. I worked in communications in the hospital. And like you said, I've worked at a recording company, and I've dealt with a lot of celebrities. I went to a lot of social gatherings, a lot of parties, promotionals. I mean, wherever there was fun, wherever there was anything going from the job, I was there. Nothing stopped me from doing anything at any time.
I want to tell you something. You know, I've been doing this show for a fair number of years now, and I think that the last couple minutes of what you've had to say has probably potentially reached more people than almost anything else I've heard said. I hope that people watching will remember those words.
I hope so, too.
We'll be back right after this.
Thank you.
Hi, welcome back. With me right now are two highly unusual people, Edward and Kathy Lewis. They were born with cerebral palsy. Both of their parents, different sets of parents, were told that they were severely handicapped. They're not brother and sister. They are married. They have 2 children. It is rare that people with cerebral palsy do get married and have children. In fact, they don't know of any other couple that essentially in their category. Now, people told them not to get married. They got married. When Kathy became pregnant, they told her not to have the child. She's had the child. In fact, she has another child. They have 2 now. They were told they had to fight in order to keep their own children. Edward supports his family, and I think that they are a true inspiration. And I appreciate the fact that you made the effort to come down, taking your valuable time away from your children to be with us today. Thank you very much. Can you tell us a little bit about, first, I'd like a bit of an explanation of what cerebral palsy is.
Cerebral palsy is a brain damage. It can occur before, during, or after birth. And it does not have to involve the intelligence of a person.
Right.
Sometimes
So it shouldn't be confused with
does,
like mental
but no.
retardation, where the intelligence, in
No.
fact, is
Right,
reduced.
right.
You, in fact, are a college graduate
Yes,
from
I am.
Adelphi University.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the struggle that the 2 of you had just to get married, the people who were against you.
Well, nobody thought I could manage to take care of myself and to take care of a home. They thought it was ridiculous for 2 handicapped people to try to make it on their own.
Well, who was the they? What, your parents or?
No.
Not so much our parents. It was friends, people on the outside that really didn't have the knowledge of the background that we have.
No, well, knowing yourself. But you know, as I sit here, I'm proud to have you on the program. I would imagine that there are many people watching right now who have never even heard a conversation with somebody with cerebral palsy. This just occurs to me.
That's very
We will
true.
see somebody with cerebral palsy and think all manner of things about them or not know what cerebral palsy is.
Well, even our friends who have cerebral palsy disapproved of us getting married.
Why did they disapprove?
They thought we were making ourselves into a freak show. We didn't publicize our marriage any more than my sister, who is not handicapped, did.
Sure.
But our friends with a handicap were anyway jealous of us, too.
Well, that happens with all
Yeah.
kinds of people.
Right.
You know, that
You were
particular thing.
entitled to lead a perfectly normal life, and certainly
But they
patting yourself
didn't
after
feel
that.
that way.
Yeah.
We have some photos that you were kind enough to bring of your children. Let's take a look at some of the domestic scenes we have here. You see it over here in the monitor. How old are the kids now?
Well, they're 7.5 and 3.5, but in that picture they're 4 and about 6 months old.
Let me ask Dr. Panzarella a question. People may be wondering what's the possibility of people with cerebral palsy passing it on?
No, Bill. It's not hereditary. We don't know the reason why a baby will develop cerebral palsy. There are many theories, but it is not transmitted from mother or father to child.
So when you first had the children, what were the influences or the forces who tried to prevent you from keeping the children?
Nassau County Social Services.
Social services?
Yes.
People?
I had heard that I would be qualified for someone to come into my home to teach me to take care of the baby. Well, I called them and they told me, well, don't worry, we'll have someone there when you have the child. 3 weeks before I had my first baby, they came to my door with papers for me to sign the baby over to the county.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that awful?
Oh, my
terrible.
heavens.
What's your
Take the
reaction to
onus
this,
on that.
Annie?
I really think that's really heartbreaking.
It is.
It was scary. It was so scary to even my parents
Well, of course.
that they were gonna. They said if worse came to worse, they would adopt her and I
Parents
could
would.
take care of her. I said, no, Mom, she's my baby, our baby. We're gonna fight for this baby.
Now, Dr. Panzarella, again, back to you just for a second here. Although I know you're a total champion of people who are disabled really getting out there and
Right.
doing it, on any level, can you understand why the so-called authorities would have been concerned about a couple such as this having a child and raising a child?
Bill, if you look at it economically, you look at it as a part of society not wanting to be burdened with the disabled, possibly you might be able to make a case. But they forget, these two are human beings. They have the same desires. They have the same loves. She wants to be a mother. And
She
that's
is
an
a mother.
inherent right of every woman.
Well, let us continue our program. Today is a show dedicated to disabled people raising normal children. We'll be back right after this. Kathy and Edward Lewis are our guests. Our theme today is people with a disability raising normal children. What have you told your children? You have two daughters, is that correct?
Yes.
Your daughters so far about why their parents move differently and talk differently than most other parents.
Well, from the time Vicky, our oldest one, was 18 months, we started talking to her that Mommy and Daddy are different, but we'll do the best we can. And gradually we explained to her it was called cerebral palsy. At the age of 2.5, we were in the store and somebody laughed at us. And she went over to them and said, "Don't you laugh at my mommy. I love her. She's handicapped, but I love her."
That's a
That's
very
precious.
touching story.
My
Very
second
precious.
one has followed in the same steps. I used to tell them to hold Mommy's hand because Mommy can't hold yours. So then I would say, well, hold my hand so I don't fall. So my little one, the youngest one, turned around and says, "Well, Mommy, if you fall, you'll get back up anyway." So they have a very warm sense to our handicaps.
Well, then they feel your love without question. I mean, this is
They're growing up with it too, and they're right in that situation where they can realize that they're leading a perfectly
Well,
normal.
in school, I have been told that Vicky goes out of her way to help
I would
the
imagine. Yeah.
disabled in the school system.
We have what is known as a public service announcement here that has to do with cerebral palsy, and I would very much like to run it if we could right now, because you're included on the spot. Let's take a look and then we'll continue.
We gave it a lot of thought before we had Vicky. We knew we had adjusted very well to each other, and we wanted to share it with somebody else, so we decided to raise a family. Here, Vicky,
There are people who question Kathy and Ed Lewis's decision to raise a family, but as Kathy says, it's probably because they are not ready to accept something different. People with handicaps are not supposed to stand on the sidelines. They have every right to experience life to the fullest, its setbacks, its pain, its triumphs, and most especially its joys. United Cerebral Palsy believes in these rights and spends a lot of its time securing them. With your help, they can do a lot more.
What a beautiful shot that is at the end. I think this is, I mean, again, I don't mean to be repetitious, but today's program is so moving. It's a real tribute to the human spirit and to love and to loving, I think. So your home is set up like any other normal home. You do not make any special concessions for your disability, which is primarily a lack of motor coordination,
Yes.
correct?
Right.
This is something that for those people watching now who may not really understand what cerebral palsy is, that is how we would define it.
Yes.
It's a lack of physical coordination and speech, a certain speech impairment. But there is no, what about with the actual raising of the children? Do you have a lot of help with that, or?
No. When it comes to raising our children, we are raising them by ourselves. We set the rules, we enforce them. We are a little stricter with them as far as when we call, when they're outside, they must come. We cannot always run after them. And they have certain jobs around the house which children their age may not have, such as helping us clean off the table or picking up something that I have dropped.
It's not too young to start with those kinds of responsibility. And Edward, also I'd like to say that prior to one of our commercial breaks, prior to coming on, you said something which was very touching, I think people should hear, and that is your feeling about your job and supporting your family.
Well, I've been lucky. I work for Nassau County Social Services. I'm a file clerk, and I'm in my 10th year. And as I told you before, I'm lucky that I can say I support my own family. In other words, I'm a tax payer. I'm not a tax burden.
Let's pause on that note. We'll be right back. With us right now is Ann Morris. You just saw a photograph of Ann Morris with her young daughter and her guide dog. Ann Morris is blind and she has two children, ages 7.5 and 5.5. And she completes our panel today on our special program about handicapped, disabled people raising normal children. Welcome, Ann. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
And it's good to have you with us. And I'm sure that everyone on the panel probably has some questions about the particular difficulties of being a blind person raising sighted children. Obviously, it's not easy. So first, tell us a little bit about what went into your decision to want to have children in the first place.
Well, I wasn't so sure that I really wanted to have children, and I was very apprehensive about it. But once I decided to and I became pregnant, everything sort of fell into place after that. I had a great deal of difficulty in finding any kind of assistance. For example, while I was pregnant and I knew nothing about child care or infant care, I tried to find out where I could get some kind of assistance to learn about these needs, and there seemed to be absolutely nothing available to me at that time.
Well, you are part of the Blind Parents Support Group now, which obviously has been a blessing, I suppose.
Right, but this is a new organization that has only been created in the last 2 years, so it really didn't help me when I needed it.
Well, let's talk about when you did need the help and what you had to overcome as a blind parent. Again, to repeat a question, at what point during your child's growth and development did you try to explain to them the nature of your own disability and how it was going to affect their lives as your daughter?
Okay, I really didn't have to explain anything to them. They automatically learned by instinct, for example, to take my hand and put it on top of the blocks, that building that they had built, or to take my hand and show me a picture that they had crayoned. And they did that automatically without my even having to tell them about it. When they became about 3, I told them, you know, that I was blind and I couldn't see, and then they understood the words blind. I also got a seeing eye dog when my daughter was 2.5, and while I was pregnant with my second daughter. And she just seemed to understand the purpose of the dog. And as a matter of fact, often some younger children in a department store or wherever would come up and they'd pet the dog, and my little girl would say, "You can't pet that dog, he's working." So, you know, she in her own way helped to educate the public also.
I think that one of the things that has come out loud and clear on this program with all of our guests is the support that has come from the children. We begin the show focusing on the parents, the difficulty of raising, being disabled and raising children, and we find that in all cases the kind of love, support, defensiveness, and completing, making up for the disability, whatever, is coming from the children.
Right. I feel that if you bring your children up in a loving, sharing type of household, the children will want to help you. And I feel that it's wrong to demand help from the children. And I think many handicapped people often tend to do this, and I think it would make a child older before their time, and they may come to resent the parents later on for doing that. So I think it's very, very important not to demand, not to even expect help from your children, but they'll automatically give it.
Let's have some comments on that. Doctor, you?
Yes, I think she's quite right. But one silly question, Ann, as all children tend to do, leave things around. How have you overcome that problem?
Yeah, that's a good practical question, Doctor.
Probably taken too many.
Well, my children are very, very normal, and they still don't clean up the way that I think things should be cleaned up. I've stepped on some of their toys and broken them, and it doesn't seem to bother them. When my children were very young, I used to walk around with either slippers or perhaps even in my bare feet. You know, when they were young, when they were toddlers crawling around the floor, to prevent myself from stepping on them, you know, their little hands and their little feet. Of course, now that they're older, you know, if I step on something and it breaks, well, that's their problem for leaving
But you've
it
learned
there.
to overcome it.
What is the biggest fear that you have with regard to being a blind person? Now your husband, your man you're now married to, is also not a sighted person, is a blind person. The biggest fear that you have with regard to this responsibility of raising children?
I guess my biggest fear is what would I do if there was ever a real emergency, you know, such as a fire or something,
Yeah, I was
you
thinking
know,
the same thing.
or
But
if
they're
my
old
children,
enough now to really help
Yeah.
out for themselves. They're no longer infants in the
But
crib.
is it something you discuss with them and plan? Because
yes,
this is very
yes, we have
important.
discussed it
when-
many times. We have 2 smoke detectors in our house, and we have discussed it.
All right.
Yes.
Let us pause right now and let all of what we have been talking about for the last hour or so sink in. We will be right back. I hope that you have felt some of the same things during this program that I have felt. To just end on a note, maybe it is a little bit philosophical, there are no guarantees that life is supposed to be easy. I think we all, in our own ways, learned that. Today, the people we've spent some time with are getting along well in their lives in spite of enormous problems, and I think that can be an inspiration for all of us. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you remember many of the things that were said, and we'll see you tomorrow at midday. Thank you for watching. Thank you very much, all of you, for being here.
Well, enjoyed.